Greetings and salutations, everyone. It's AJ back with the Mighty Glue Stick. How's it going? Time for another monster, and another classic monster from Dungeons and Dragons. It's a unique to Dungeons and Dragons, and it comes out of the same origin as the Boule and some various other weird creatures from a bag of toys that was discovered and used to form the basis of some of these critters. And this one in particular is a weird looking. I mean, what is that really? Other than a rust monster? Well, we know it's a rust monster, or a rusty, as they call them. Rust monsters are pretty cool. They're an interesting critter and very alien. They essentially are a sort of mammal creature, like an armadillo. They looked very insectoid because they're covered in these bony plates that have developed to protect them. They're a relatively peaceful creature. They're not very aggressive, and they won't attack anybody who's not wearing any metal. However, they have a voracious appetite for metal, and they subsist on it almost exclusively. Well, in a way, they have a symbiotic relationship with a very potentially potent form of bacteria that suffuses their entire body, concentrated on their antennae, which come out just underneath their eyes and extend about 3 feet out of their head. They have a long 5-foot tail with sort of fans like a paddle on the end, which they can use to sweep around and knock opponents off their feet. But they sort of agitatedly galump around. Their movement is described as galumping. So when they run, it's a waddling, agitated sort of jumping prance. It's quite distinctive to their kind, and is called a galump. So what they do is they tend to galump towards the target with great enthusiasm. This is anybody who has any metal, any ferrous metal on them at all. And their sense of smell of metal is based on how pure the ferrousness of it is. So it's surmised that it's based on the magnetism of the object in question, and it is actually the bacteria enhancing and drawing the rusty towards this target. So they are indomitable, and they basically, when they have a scent of metal, they don't really let anything get in their way. They're not overly aggressive, but if attacked, they'll defend themselves, and they will swat and try to get at metal as best they can. The blood of the rust monster is suffused with this bacteria as well, so any strike against them with a metal object that penetrates their rocky hide, their bony hides or plates, will cause this liquid to almost instantly rust any metal object that has been immersed in it. And the bacteria tend to spread very rapidly over whatever object is thrust into them, or that they are splashed onto or brushed across. So it's not just a matter of the antenna touch one part of the sword and that one little bit of the sword rusts. The entire blade will rust right before your eyes extremely rapidly, and it will be a hot and energetic reaction as the bacteria turn them all into rust particles as they digest it rapidly. And then the rust monster itself uses it's got about a 6-inch long, really sticky mobile tongue that comes out of its beak-like face, and it will lap up any flecks of rust around the place as long as it's not being attacked. They feed it as soon as they're not being aggressively attacked or jostled or anything. But they have an animal level of intelligence, so they generally they're not very good at assessing anything other than find food or run away from danger. But again, they're fairly fearless when it comes to metal, and they will run in and attack anything. So what is it? The rust monster is a mammal-ish, and they breed. They don't form pairs for life. They breed kind of opportunistic whenever they can with one partner, and they will set up a sort of a ritual where they chitter at each other. They make squawking, chittering sounds, kind of like agitated chickens or guinea pigs, and they sort of galump around each other, and then they mate, and a single offspring will gestate inside the rust monster for, how long is it? It's 4 to 7 months that it gestates, so quite a while. And when they give birth, eventually, it's a fully formed, smaller version of a rust monster, and it has the bacteria that allows it to rust metal on it already. So they are as fully effective as an adult, really, in what they do. They reach full adult size within 1 year, at which point they are able to breed themselves. So the rust monster population can bounce back from predation very quickly. And also with a huge amount of metal at their disposal, they can basically explode in population very quickly. So it's likely, because they frequent mines and other places of activity where metal has been freed from the earth, because they're not very capable diggers. They can't dig through rock. They can really just move loose soil and things. So they have subsisted on whatever sort of ores and oxides they can find. But they will quite frequently hunt down mines and mine shafts. So dwarves have developed several methods of getting rid of or controlling the population of rust monsters. So they'll have a couple of rusty guards who are armed with wooden weapons, typically long clubs or like quarterstaves with, they almost look like rowing oars, paddles, that they use for keeping them back and beating them to death. They also use the circle of chain method, where they'll have a magic user who's sitting inside a circle of rusty chain with a couple of guards with these long wooden weapons with them. And the magic user will essentially hit the rusty with a fireball as soon as it comes close to munch on the chain, while still staying quite distant from the magic user and out of reach of that long tail. And they'll just blast them and push them aside, and usually leave them as a warning somewhere that this mine is protected and active. So it's unfortunate. I mean, in this, they're not really a very aggressive creature, and that's the tragedy of it, really. But for adventurers and things, they are extremely dangerous, because they can strip you of all of your armor and shields and helmets and swords and belt buckles, you name it, very quickly. So they have a natural armor class of 14, which is their bony plates. They have a tendency to curl up and protect themselves if they're being assaulted, and just basically lashing out with their brushing antennae, or sweeping around with their tail to knock people off their feet. They've got 27 hit points and the gallumping speed of 40 feet, so they can move along quite a clip. Strength of 13, dexterity 12, constitution 13, intelligence is 2, and they've got a wisdom of 13 and charisma of 6. Dark vision out to 60 feet, although their vision is not very, they don't have a lot of visual acuity. They're kind of myopic, really. And a passive perception of 11. They're not really that interested in anything other than metal and metal deposits, so when left to their own devices and there's not much metal around, they tend to be very slow moving and energy conserving, and they can survive for up to 2 months between a large meal, and a large meal would be, say, a suit of plate mail armor, for instance. That would be a large meal, and that can tide them over for 2 months. Also, if they manage to chase somebody who's wearing or carrying a lot of metal up a tree, they will wait for weeks underneath that tree for that target to come back down again. And unfortunately, they can wait for up to a couple of months before their hunger gets the best of them and they have to go off looking for another target. By that time, whoever's up the tree has probably long since fallen unconscious and fallen out of the tree. So, they can sense ferrous metals within 30 feet, and it does say here that they rust any non-magical weapon made of metal that hits. Now, as for magical, I mean, that's a cop-out. I don't care what sort of magic you have on a weapon. If it's made of metal, it's vulnerable to a rust monster. That is one of the reasons why rust monsters are so fearsome, is they will rust metal magical items. However, I would give the magical item a saving throw, similar to a death saving throw. So if they roll over 10, they manage to stave off the rusting. And I would add to that as well that they get a +1 on that roll for every +1 that the item has. So a +5 sword only has to roll above a 5 to avoid ever getting rusted by a rust monster on a d20. So that's perfectly fine. I mean, it could unfortunately rust an artifact, and I would leave that up to you, really. But you may have it that it basically just damages the sword. So after dealing damage, the weapon takes a permanent and cumulative. This is after a weapon strikes the rust monster. It takes a permanent and cumulative -1 penalty to damage rolls, and if the penalty drops to -5, the weapon is destroyed. Non-magical ammunition made of metal that hits the rust monster is destroyed after dealing damage. It's got a bite attack, which does 5 points of piercing damage, striking with +3. But it generally really doesn't bite unless it absolutely has to. So a creature that pins it or corners it or grapples it, that may invoke a bite. But otherwise, they're really just trying to get at you with the antenna, and they won't bite you unless provoked. Their antennae, any metal object they can see within 5 feet of it. So that says that they've got a 5-foot reach with their antennae. I imagine that's because they move and lunge forward with them. If the object isn't being worn or carried, so this is something like an iron gate or a doorway or a statue or an iron golem, say, the touch will destroy a 1-foot cube of it. And if the object is being worn or carried, the creature must make a DC 11 dexterity saving throw to avoid the rust monster's touch, which is not that high. And but be reasonable. If somebody's wearing a full body metal armor and carrying a shield and things, you may want to increase the DC for that, because it's generally speaking every part of them can be touched by the rust monster and will cause all sorts of mayhem. So yeah, I'll just leave that up to your discretion. If the object touched is either metal armor or a metal shield being worn or carried, it takes a permanent and cumulative -1 penalty to its armor class. If its armor class is reduced to an AC of 10, or a shield that drops to a +0 bonus, it is destroyed. And if the object touched is a held metal weapon, it rusts as described in the traits of the rust monster. So rust monsters, typically they're subterranean. They are eaten by other creatures, although I'm not entirely sure what sort of nutritious value they would have. Typically the bacteria that converts the rust inside them produces sugars for the basic carbohydrates for the rust monster, their metabolism to consume. So they probably taste very, very rusty, and also very sweet, which is strange, I would imagine. They'll taste quite different after they've just eaten metal, like almost potently sweet. And they would get successively more dank or sour tasting as they ran out of energy, and start looking for more food. So yeah, rust monsters can be used in all sorts of ways in your campaign, and a favourite, of course, is kobolds or goblins who don't use metal. They use sharpened rocks and things like that, and bits of bone, who tame them and use them against metal-wearing civilized races to even the odds a little bit, because if they manage to disarm a bunch of metal-wearing humanoids, an adventuring party, for instance, by rusting all of their metal objects, they become that much more powerful, and the tide can quickly turn as they overpower them with their superior numbers using mob attack rules. And really, they just have to worry about magic users and things like that, but a hail of arrows or sling stones at the magic user is going to keep them off their feet when all of their fighters have already been taken out of action. So they can be quite potent, and they can definitely add a lot of excitement to an adventure. And of course, they wander pretty much anywhere underground, particularly where around dwarven ruins and things like that. You're most likely to find populations of rust monsters that have run amok, left unchecked, and controlled by the dwarven rusty guards. So, thank you very much, everybody. I'll be back again with another monster video very shortly. Thanks for listening.